Thanks, Tara. There's a few questions and comments coming through at the moment, and I suppose I'll respond to a couple of general ones myself first, and then I'll put a couple to yourself, Tara. But just back on the parcel question, someone has asked, can you put in a whole parcel? And you can. If the reap field equals the parcel, obviously you can just apply on that parcel itself. And scrub, just to clarify, is not deducted from the reap field itself, but it is accounted for in the scoring system, as Tara covered earlier, in that if there's a high level of cover, it can impact negatively on the field score. Temporary fences, yes, because we have a pilot project, temporary fences are allowed for both field margins, if you're fencing off field margins. And just to clarify that in relation to the fence distance from a watercourse, obviously we have some farms which are impacted by the nitrates 1.5 meter buffer, so any fencing needs to be outside that buffer. But any farms which are not obliged to fence, obviously they can count the full margin. So where that buffer applies, obviously you have to add on the field margin, either the 1, 2, 3 or 5 meters onto the 1.5 meter buffer where it applies. And that bonus itself applies on all farms. It's not restricted to cattle farms. If you're fencing a watercourse or drain, you can avail of that bonus mark. There were some questions about boundaries and things, but we'll leave them to tomorrow's presentation. There's a specific presentation on boundaries and assessments tomorrow. Just to clarify another thing on field margins, if the score is less than 35, there are some questions here about having the fence margin. The field margin option is totally optional for a farmer to do, and there is a density question which LAM will work out for you, as Tara said. So if the score less than 35 in that question 1 and 2, there's no obligation to put in field margin, but if you put in a field margin on one or more side of the field, that will help boost your score depending on the density, the overall density per that field. Tara, there's just a few questions, I suppose, on the vegetation structure and the litter level size. Maybe you can comment on that. And there's another question, I suppose, on the indicators, why some species are included and others not. So maybe if you could just make a few comments on that.
Yeah, let's start with the indicators question. Thank you, Jerome. The indicators that we've come up with for REAP, that we didn't come up with them, is the fact that they are from Farm Ecos research project, which has been ongoing for 5 years. It's a research project between Galway University and Trinity, and they're looking at they're looking at various aspects and various of results-based payments, and they're also evaluating all of the current EIPs that are ongoing in Ireland at the moment. So we've used those indicator species. So just another couple of points maybe that I meant to say when I was talking about those indicator species is that the reason that we have so many is because this is a national scheme, a national pilot, that that if we were restricted to one area like the Burren, for example, that we could maybe have a shorter list. But because we have to, that we're open to every soil type and every geology type in Ireland, then we have to, and for wet conditions and dry conditions, we have to put a spread of species across all of those conditions. We have to have all of those there. And just a little word of warning is that, that I don't think that anybody would, but if somebody decided that they were just going to tick any species at all on this scorecard and just knock down any, that, well, we know, and GLAMS knows, which species are likely to be found together. So in wet grassland and dry grassland and on different soil and vegetation, different bedrock areas, that you'd expect to find different plant communities. And so we would know what looks wrong. It'll automatically appear to us if things are not being correctly ticked there. Of course, there's room for error with everybody. That this is a learning curve, and we understand that you've never done this before. And it's easy for somebody like me to say looking at species is easy when I've been looking at them for a very long time. but do appreciate that it's a bit of work in this year. But look, after in year 2, this will be second nature to you as well, and it's just, it'll be a little bit slow, and maybe to take a little bit of time for this year first season, but that's all to be expected. The features, the species that are chosen, they're indicator species that they're chosen because of various scientific research. So that they will be shown that they're species associated with different plant communities, and I mean all habitats are classified across the world and in Ireland as well. And I didn't speak about any of that today, but there's lots of different habitat associations, and all of these indicators are associated with those habitat types. So, and they've also associated with low nutrient levels. So that some of the other species, like buttercups, for example, it's not associated. It doesn't give any indication. Like the plant species that are listed are surrogates of biodiversity in a field. So they're not the whole representation of the biodiversity in a field. But sure, we can't be going out asking people to be looking for all of the arthropods and insects and everything else in the field. So we're using these indicator species as surrogates for how good a field is for biodiversity and how good it is for carbon sequestration and for the climate too. Then for litter levels, it's the litter levels is just put in there so that that we do want to reward these fields for being farmed. Farming is incredibly important for maintaining our biodiversity, and that if somebody decides to leave a field alone and doesn't bother managing it at all and builds up a litter thatch in it, well, it's not good for biodiversity. You quickly lose species out that way as well. So it's not just through over farming, but it's through under farming as well. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And just to clarify again, there's a few questions I suppose coming in relation to minimum payments for league. I mean, you have to achieve a score of 4 or more in order to be paid on a league field. So if through the combination of the combined scores of the different questions is less than 4, then there is no payment for the league field, but they can still qualify for the complementary actions on that field if they decide to opt for them, and they may improve their score in the following year. So just to make that clarification. There's another question here, and can a road or a grassland strip that's fenced off? No, the margins themselves have to be managed margins, so there have to be grass species. It's not roadways that don't count as such. So it's they're fenced off areas. There can be existing fenced off margins, obviously, or newly created margins will qualify. Just to clarify, I suppose, a few questions that are coming up as well on the scoring. Yes, the bit of confusion maybe about the scoring system itself. The scorecards themselves, both for multi-species lay and lig, are out of 100. So the individual questions are then added up to that total of 100. They're then rounded up in the GLAM system, converted to a score out of 10. So that's how the payment system works. So a 6.5 would round up to a 7. A 6.4 would be a 6. So that's how the scoring system will work, and that will be automatically done in GLAMs. There's another question, I suppose, in relation to the payment year. Yes, it's a project is running for, let's say, just over 1.5 years, but the payment period is for the full 2 years, because I made mention at the start, I suppose, that what we're looking at is a pilot project, but that we're also rewarding existing historical management, as is the case with the majority of results-based schemes. So any fields which are in good condition are there due to historical management. So that allows us to reward them for the full year's payments in both years. Some people are asking as well about deadlines. That again, we have a number of sessions tomorrow, including multi-species lay, field boundaries, and looking at the specifications as well, and I'll talk a little bit about inspections and evaluation. But the deadline for the assessments for LIG will be the end of July, 31st of July, and for 15th of August for multi-species lays. There's a couple of questions as well on the field margins, where to measure from. We're trying to keep it as simple as possible. I suppose we don't want you have to go out and measure either field boundaries or margins in the field. So yep, what we're saying is the full length of a boundary. So from node to node, or from a reference point to field corner to field corner. Obviously, gateways and things like that will have to be accounted for. You know, you need access, but drinking points won't be allowed on anywhere where you're fencing field margins along water courses. So I think that's pretty much it from us for today. As I said, it's not possible to answer all questions. We've quite a big group, but we will get to your questions in time. We'll probably do a frequently asked question document similar to what we did with the opening session, and we'll just to I forgot to do the polls from the last presentation, so I'm going to open the polls now. Just a couple of questions and reminders of what was covered in that LIG presentation. So if we can put up those polls there now for people to see, please. So what's the maximum proportion of ryegrass allowed on a LIG field? Is it 20%, 30%, or 40%? Again, this was covered by Tara in the last presentation. So we have a tolerance there, but it's just it's a question of how much. So we'll close the poll now and just see what the views were on that one. And actually, the first question was the correct one, but we only had 20% of respondents indicating that one. So 30%. Sorry, 30% is the correct answer there in the middle, but 57% if you got that answer correct. So there's up to 30% of a reap field may have ryegrass content, but over that, it's just not a suitable field for LIG. So if we can put up the next poll there now. So again, what score do you need to achieve on questions 1 and 2 of the scorecard? So the fence margins are not required. Is it 35, 40, or 45? So again, just to reiterate, the score on the scorecard are out of 100, and that's converted to a score out of 10 in GLAMS, and we round up or round down the scores as appropriate to determine what payment rate is applicable. So fence meal margins themselves, of course, as I said earlier, are optional if someone wants to improve their score.
Jerome?
So, yeah. Go ahead, Tara.
Should I mention that, you know, that in order to score the marks that's required in questions 1 and 2, so that fenced field margins are not required, that you would have to have a semi-natural field. You know, a semi-improved field, a field with any improvement, that they will need the field margins to be fenced to award those points. Those points will are, you know, they'd only be for very, very good quality grassland. So, you know, a medium type grassland, a regular grassland, isn't going to get to high enough there that the margins won't be required for the points.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Tara. And we'll close the poll, I think. Now we'll just see what the results. So yes, 60% got it right on that one. So it's 35 is the combined total for questions 1 and 2. So as Tara said, you're already looking at semi-natural species rich fields in that case, so there's no need for a fenced field margin.